Welcome to the fourth episode of the Strength Connect podcast. In today's episode, we have Mackenzie Baker. Mackenzie is a sport and exercise nutritionist who has worked with Fortitude Nutrition Coaching for about 5 years.
Today was a little bit of a different episode with a different guest. Mackenzie doesn't have the same perspectives around, or a lot of the same perspectives around nutrition as we do from a bodybuilding background. So we're able to talk about his approach to nutrition for clients away from standard practices such as calorie and macro tracking. We also looked at his research in energy availability for surfers and also touched a little bit on trending topics like carnivore diet and plant-based diets.
If you guys are on Spotify, make sure you hit that follow button and give us a rating. We appreciate any of these reviews. They really help us get this content out to more and more people. If you want to save 10% on VPA supplements, you can use the code Hayden10. That'll save you some dollars across the store. All right, let's get into it.
Hey, Mackenzie, how's it going, mate?
Not too bad. Apologies for the lateness.
Nah, you're all good. You're all good. How's your day been?
Pretty busy, pretty stressful. Actually just walked in the door, phoned ahead to get my girlfriend to get the laptop ready, get the water bottle ready. Yeah.
Sorry to hear, bro. We can take a couple minutes just to have a breather if you want before we start.
No. Let's go.
All right.
I don't want to waste more of your time.
I love the matching camo.
I'm really into camo at the moment. It wasn't really intentional. It just kind of ended up like that. Yeah. It's honestly my work clothes.
You're currently on the tools, hey?
I decided to get involved in a family business, which is in like earth moving.
Right. Okay.
I've been doing that properly for about 1.5 years now. Whereas previously, like nutrition was my full-time job. And now it's back to what it started as, which was like a side hustle.
Yeah. Okay. What kind of made you make that decision?
That was a very big decision, a very tough one. It was a combination of various factors, but I was surfing in Indonesia about 1.5 years ago, and I ruptured my ACL.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of like a catalyst to a lot of change. So just before that, I'd finished my master's about a couple of weeks before the injury, and I was already starting to think about, okay, what's next? And I didn't want it to be a study thing. I wanted it to be like a career thing in nutrition, a business thing. And I thought about it for months and months and months and came up with honestly nothing. I was like, where can I go from here with being a nutrition professional? And nothing that you typically hear, like, oh, get coaches under you and all those sort of comments. None of them were appealing to me at all. And I definitely didn't want to do a PhD personally. And then the injury happened. I came back to Australia and I was pretty bored. And also started to think more long term. And there was money was a part of it as well. But just really like having something new to work towards, or something where there was more of a sort of path of where I could see steps, levels up.
Yeah.
And I just didn't see that with nutrition. And what started off as a passion project has sort of gone back to that for me.
So do you have any plans with nutrition, or is it more just maintain what you're doing now and focus on the earth moving stuff?
Yeah, this is another thing I've thought a lot about. Like, I really just want to be selective with the clients I work with, because I can only work with a handful now. And as I said in the sort of thing I sent you, I did my master's research in surfing, and surfing is sort of my main leisure activity and has been my whole life. So I'm most curious in exploring that area of nutrition further, as far as working with clients or just being in that space. The difference now is that I don't need nutrition to pay anything. Like it's not a bill payer. It's not a rent payer. So, surfing's a really hard sport to be in. There's not much receptivity. Is that even a word? People aren't very receptive to anything science, really. Or nutrition coaching is something that is sort of very niche in surfing and not really discussed very much. So basically my attitude is like, I'm just going to keep focusing on that. And if I get no clients, I don't really care. And I've just got no expectations, and I'm doing it exclusively because I like it. And I'm cool with that. I still work with a handful of clients from when it was my full-time thing. And eventually, of course, they will drop off. And if I don't replace those clients with surfing athletes, then that doesn't bother me. It's like exclusively passion or an interest in nutrition, and I don't really want to be working with people who don't make it fun.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of freedom in that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think regardless of how much you love nutrition and coaching, or whether you're just like a personal trainer or whatever, I think it's undeniable that everyone will work with a client because of a money aspect, or they'll have a handful of clients who they don't really enjoy working with, or they find them a lot of stress, or they're very draining. So just not having, like, being able to not say yes, being able to say no to people who won't add value to your coaching experience as a professional. And really going back to the roots of what it was, which was a side hustle, exclusively a passion project, then I think that's quite a nice thing as well.
We're going to explore the surfing side of things a little bit later on in the podcast. But to give you a little bit of context about us, and one of the reasons why I was keen to get you on was we're both into bodybuilding. I've been in the fitness industry now, finished uni, 2020? And around then, I came into the industry as a PT, had a strong kind of bodybuilding influence, and I found your stuff, and it really opened my mind to the influence that bodybuilding had over the general population in the fitness industry, and how that maybe wasn't necessarily the right way to go for everyone. You had a lot of interesting views that I hadn't, I guess, been exposed to before around weight management, cycles, like what the goal should be for individuals around nutrition. And so we want to explore a couple of them, starting with, I guess this is a big one you've probably spoken about a lot, but calorie tracking. Because as I said, I came into the fitness industry, and the idea that I had was you want someone to lose weight, get them tracking, get them in a calorie deficit. And I think that is still the default for a lot of people. And I know that you see it more as a tool to be used in specific situations. So where would you consider it being valuable and not so valuable?
So I want to preface that by saying a lot of coaches are bodybuilders. And I think that the assumption is that the people I work with want to do the same stuff as me, and they're interested in the same stuff as me, and they have a similar life, and what I can do, what has worked for me should also work for them. And I think, obviously if you're a bodybuilding coach, then yeah, that's 100% applicable. And, then the strategies that you utilize as a bodybuilder would, not always apply to the T, but would apply in that sort of general sense. If you're doing a competition prep, almost certainly there's going to be a lot of objectivity. That involves things like calorie tracking, for example. Training is usually equated in some form, whether it be sets per body part per week or volume or whatever. And this is because these particular goals require this sort of precision or this objectivity. And the individual has a set of values that lend itself to that. and they've molded their lifestyle to suit those value sets. And therefore, all of these strategies, such as calorie tracking, apply. However, in the real world, a lot of people don't really care about being a bodybuilder. Ultimately, they're in the gym, or they're seeing a nutrition professional, or they're working on some aspect of their nutrition or training related health, because they want to have a better life. And I think we should take a step back, and when we're thinking about what goals people want to achieve, ultimately it comes back to that. And our nutrition interventions or our training interventions should consider that first and foremost. And that might mean, of course, that we're taking trade-offs from best practice in like a optimal fat loss approach, because we're doing so in a way that is actually life enhancing. Because when we think about health, we have various facets, and what might work really well for one person could have an overall net negative effect on total health for another person. So I'll give you just an example. I once had a client who was a pastry chef. This individual just wanted to feel better. Literally, weight loss was a nice thing, but that wasn't the priority. It was like, I want to feel better. I've become quite interested in health. Now, if I said to this client, you must track your calories, the impact that would have on her business, because she owned the pastry business, the inability to just go and try the things that she makes, that would have there would be a significant conflict with her values, and there would be financial health consequences. So the net overall effect of that nutrition intervention would have been actually negative. So yeah, long story short is it's all about it's always a right tool for the job scenario. And I think, keeping in mind that people are doing this to make their lives better is the first thing, but understanding what a better life looks like to them and their values. And I think even the clients will come to you with a skewed perspective of what that is for them. And they'll default to I just want to lose weight. I just want to look better. But they haven't considered all the consequences or the trade-offs of pursuing that goal. And I think a coach can open discussion with clients in a collaborative manner, never I'm telling you what to do manner, to try and really expose, well, what exactly do you want from this whole thing that why you sought my expertise? And then when you have that in mind, applying a tool from the toolkit that is going to yield that net positive effect. And in some cases that is calorie tracking. In other cases, calorie tracking couldn't be, further from an appropriate approach.
I want to touch on, Mackenzie, what you said there about the fact that calorie tracking comes a lot of the time from coaches who are involved in the bodybuilding space.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, given that, depending on the way we see the world, that has such a large influence on our constitution or our biases towards, the way we guide our clients, given that Instagram has been and social media has been so engulfed by bodybuilding and fitness, and the way that the algorithm is where it feeds you more of what you perceive as the right or wrong way, do you think that that's had a really tremendously detrimental impact on people within your profession in terms of their ability to provide more appropriate information around things like intuitive eating or other techniques aside from calorie tracking, or a lot of these principles which have just been projected on a lot of people because it's been one of the methods for recomp among athletes that are competing in these bodybuilding competitions or physique sports?
Yes, I think coaches can definitely find themselves in an echo chamber. But I think this was the case well before social media. You've just got to look at some PT meal plans from, I don't know, like 2012 or something. Yeah. You just got to look at that sort of stuff and you'll see that there's a huge bodybuilding influence. I think the introduction of social media has exacerbated that, because now you have a physique standard in males and females that is, I guess, really pushed. And personally or observationally, with a lot of the clients who I've worked with over the years, like, to say that negative body image is common, I think would absolutely be valid. And the whole, I don't want to go into the body image conversation because I have some issues with certain, I guess, viewpoints of people who are very like, anti-weight loss. It's all about body image, like all that sort of stuff. Um, but I think that the level of emphasis that is placed on can be so overwhelming and all-consuming that any perspective of, like total health or life enjoyment, can really suffer. And people will do some nutrition things and training things that are very damaging, not just from a physical health perspective, but from just an overall, like the consequences of some of the things that people are doing, the impact on things like their social life or just their general life enjoyment, the level of restriction that they are imposing upon themselves can have some really, I guess, opposite life enhancing effects, if that, for lack of a better phrase.
Approach on your social life and other factors which you get well-being out of. Now, I understand, Mackenzie, you actually competed previously. I think you.
How did you know that?
Competition. So, was this an eye-opening experience for you, and where you saw, this isn't the life I want to live, or the kind of restriction that I want to have imposed on myself for the rest of my life?
Yeah, so context, uni student, working as a receptionist at a PT studio, very influenced by the owner of the gym and the coaches, and, oh yeah, let's do this thing. So it was like an 8-week prep. I competed in men's bikini, aka men's fitness, ICN. I think I got like 5th in the novice or whatever it is. I don't. And look, at the time, yeah, I was serious about my training and nutrition. And like for a decent amount of time, I was the person who diligently tracked their macros every single day. The streak on MyFitnessPal and all the training stuff as well. But, the thing was, like, that was cool and all. And yeah, I learned a lot of stuff and I practiced a lot of, I guess, discipline and taught myself, like, how much I can push myself from a physical and whatever perspective, blah, 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 blah. But like, for example, I stopped surfing for like 5 years because I was so encapsulated in that space. And, it wasn't until like just before COVID, probably 2019, where I realized that this piece from my life was really missing, like a really important thing. Like, I found myself on the weekend being like, what am I going to do? So I'd go to the gym and I'm like, or I'd do some work. I'm like, this is not my idea of a leisurely life. So it was just sort of like things like that that made me realize how much I'd actually sacrificed because I was consumed by training and nutrition. And then it started this whole, like, not rebellion, but just like, I'm going to take back what I stole from myself for so many years, like all this life enjoyment that I missed out on because I was like, oh, I got to track this, or, I've got to get my training session.
Would you say you had some form of dysmorphia or, eating disorder at that point? Would you, or would you just...
110%. Like there were literally hectic binge eating episodes followed by the despair, followed by the guilt. Like,
do you remember any particular times?
100%.
You just come home and like, what did you smash? What did you put away?
Where did I get started? So at this gym where I was working at the time, it was very Poliquin. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Poliquin, but the whole methodology with nutrition was like very, there was like big on refeeds. The thing was, like, when you're so restrictive in your approach, as soon as you give yourself an inch, you take a mile. So I'm going to have a refeed this weekend. It starts off with I'll have like a cup of uncooked rice with some honey on it. And then you go, there's some ice cream in the freezer. And I bought a tub of peanut butter for the week. And all of a sudden, you've polished off both of them because you've mixed the peanut butter into the ice cream. And then it's the point where like it's like this, you get stuck in this, you're just finding food and you're eating it. It really is this all or nothing thing. And yeah, like Christmas days, you ask my uncle some of the Christmas days, and he's like, yeah, you ate so much food, you were lying on the balcony. Like, okay, we're all going to eat heaps on Christmas Day, but this was like, another level. And yeah, it's like, where do I start? So, smashing tubs of ice cream with peanut butter in it, raiding biscuit jars, like going and ordering a pizza. I remember once I had like a full binge episode, which had like a full meat lovers pizza and then a tub of ice cream. And then I got a call from my godmother saying, "Where are you?" And I realized that we had a dinner and I forgot about it. So I then went to the dinner and polished like half a chicken, full chips, and I was in so much physical pain, but I felt guilty for A, forgetting about dinner, and then B, like I couldn't waste food. That was a situation that I was in where I had a problem with food wastage because during the dieting phase, I was like so hungry all the time that all of a sudden, like, how could you waste this, like these chips? Like you're so full, but you're still going to eat them because they're there. And if you don't eat them, they're going to get thrown out.
Yeah.
So yeah, various experiences like that. Like I could think of so many. It's like, where do I start? And I'm sure you guys, I don't want to assume here, but I think a lot of bodybuilders, especially post comp, have had like
I definitely think, yeah,
pretty
post
hectic
that
ones.
first year, you
Insatiable hunger.
oh well, even just after the show, you go and we have a burger and a pizza and a bit of ice cream and like
Oh, that's sweet.
you just overdo it a bit. But
Yeah.
Well, I personally, I'm in my first prep at the moment. And
so
although over the last, say, I don't know, 6, 7 years of training, I've gone through growth phases, gone through fat loss phases, but think I had good influences. And, there's a lot of quality research around nutrition, like from yourself, that I've been able to learn from. So I've kept relatively healthy behaviors, I like to think. But in saying that, it hasn't been until now where I'm about 14 weeks into my first prep that I've been like, oh, okay, I can understand where some of these unhealthy behaviors might come from if I'm not careful. Even though I haven't really, gone down that road as of yet, I can understand it a lot better now. And I find myself questioning a lot actually, because I've gone into training and bodybuilding. I made it my life basically. I find myself questioning as well, like, is this a net positive for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an inherent level of risk that you're undertaking. Regardless of how you approach it, there's always going to be a level of risk. And by all means, like, depending on the coach you're working with, your experience, the people in the fitness industry you surround yourself. So, Aidan, it sounds like, you've had more of like an evidence-based surrounding in your career as I guess, a trainer or like a person going to the gym. Whereas, I didn't really have that. There are different factors that will determine how much risk you're exposed to. Like if you said to me now, okay, Mac, I'm going to give you $1 million, but you've got to do a bodybuilding show. Like I'd probably have to bulk for about 2 years because I don't look like I lift really. And I'd probably, with my experience now, my understanding of nutrition and the logic around it, I think I'd probably be pretty fine. Like I don't think I would have issues post competition or anything like that. But yeah, I like if you're going and having like a burger or a nice meal with your friends after the comp, like I'm not really talking about that stuff being an issue. It's more you're a week after and you eat a little bit more than you should have and you feel really guilty and then you keep going and then it's like this uncontrolled thing. Like that's where, and then there's the body image stuff, like I'm gaining fat after I look so good and the negativity, like I'm mostly referring to that. I think that if you're having an indulgent meal after competition, like that's awesome and you probably should do that for your social health, But anyway, I'm getting off track.
Yeah, no. Coming back to, I guess bodybuilding's influence over the fitness industry in terms of calorie tracking and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
A pretty commonly used tool that I wanted to ask you about was calorie banking,
Mm-hmm.
because I know you've spoken about that a bit and how that can actually have the opposite effect. So for anyone who doesn't know what calorie banking is, basically it involves reducing your caloric intake for a day or a few days leading up to maybe an event like a dinner to give yourself more room to indulge without going over calories. But you've spoken about, I guess, how that doesn't always work. Do you mind giving a little bit more insight on that?
Yeah, so restricting so you've got more wiggle room for like later excess is kind of the premise of, or like the idea behind calorie banking. I think in theory it's fantastic, but the reality is that often people overeat due to excessive prior restraint. And when you fall into a state of overeating or a lack of control or a lack of consciousness around food, it's very easy to eat back the calories you saved plus more. So you've got to think like when you restrict, you get hunger, you get increased food focus, you get increased excitement for the post-restriction thing, which might be like the meal out or the refeed even, or whatever it might be. This anticipation, you build it up and you're really creating the perfect storm for excessive eating. And it's not so much, hey, I've had more calories than, my target from a over time perspective. Like that's one negative if you want to look at it that way. It's more the psychological effects or the just the negativity, the psychological distress that people might endure after doing something like that. And I think that supersedes the positives of like, okay, I overate calories, but now I have my social health has copped a massive boost, and that's a really good thing for my overall happiness. The psychological ramification that you'll usually see from some kind of excessive amount of eating after a phase of restraint can supersede that. And I think the overall effect tends to be quite negative, not only on, say, a nutrition dependent goal, but also just general total health. Now, does that mean I'm anti-calorie banking? No, I just think people overuse it. And the magnitude by which they use it is probably also too great. The other thing is if you say to yourself, oh, I'm just going to like do a mild calorie banking thing, it is a slippery slope and it can turn into like it can happen before or after. So it can turn into a excessive eating followed by excessive restraint to try and undo damage, which, you could class as disordered eating. Or it can be, I'm restricting for a later episode of excessive eating. But, if you're someone who is very experienced in nutrition, if you're someone who is able to manage hunger levels through intelligent strategy or food selection and things like that, and if your degree of calorie banking is quite mild, I think it can be a very useful tool. Like I said, the issue is the magnitude of calorie banking and the frequency of use. I think there are also a lot of people who just aren't ready for something like that. And that is especially those who say things like, if I don't track my calories, I'll just eat and eat and eat. Or they'll say things like, I can never trust my hunger and fullness cues. Now, that sort of crowd are the ones who absolutely should probably not be calorie banking, because pretty much there is a degree of disordered eating already present. And doing something like calorie banking is absolutely going to exacerbate that.
For those individuals, for an individual like that, maybe they had fat loss goals, but calorie banking isn't the right tool for them. Are there any other strategies that they could implement to maintain a solid social life, but also achieve a body composition goal at the same time?
Yeah. So I would honestly say accept and respect. So accept that if you have a social occasion on, or you're going on a holiday for a week, a long weekend or something, or you're going to a wedding or like whatever it might be, accept that you're probably going to eat more calories than you would like to for your goal, but respecting that for its benefits. Okay, so I ate more calories on the long weekend because I went for you know, a weekend away with my whoever. But that was a really enjoyable experience. I was able to relax, and really respecting the positives that you got from those excessive calories, because there can be a lot of positives. But then also thinking, okay, well, what about the fat loss goals? Well, you don't need to be in a calorie deficit every single day of the week, month, or year to yield a fat loss outcome. So if you have some days where you are around your maintenance because you're on holidays for a long weekend, you have a wedding, friend's wedding or something, like realistically, it's not going to stop you from losing body fat. And I would almost argue that if you take that respect and accept mindset to those days where maybe you eat a little bit more, um, it's going to make it more likely that you're going to avoid excessive restraint and binge eating and developing a vicious cycle like a binge restrict cycle that is going to have a far greater negative effect on your ability to eat an appropriate calories for fat loss over a period of time, compared to just saying, it's my friend's wedding, I'm probably just going to accept that I'm going to have a few more calories here, and not trying to do anything to prepare for it, and not trying to do anything after it to undo the damage, and just letting averages over time take care of it.
Yeah, I think many people are also more likely to kind of have that attitude the next day if they feel like they've, done damage or made a mistake. There's more chance they're gonna be like, "Fuck it, I've fucked it now. I might as well just send it today as well."
Exactly. And like I said before, it's the psychological ramifications which I think are the most noteworthy, not actually the impact on calorie intake and a fat loss or body composition goal.
So, I guess another influence that bodybuilding has had is the constant need to always be, as you said, either in a deficit or aiming for a deficit or a surplus when it comes to your nutrition and your training. Um, But what are some other areas that people can be aiming for when it comes to their nutrition outside of those two things?
Yeah, absolutely. Perform better in sport, activity, exercise, perform better in daily life, um, increase convenience with nutrition. So there is more room for other things, whether that be a career or become more relaxed with eating, so they can enjoy their social life more, or maybe not be afraid to go on a holiday and actually enjoy it, rather be so consumed by guilt and always focused on food. And I've been on holidays in my life where it's been a negative experience because I've always been so worried about food. And moving away from that would be a great nutrition goal for someone who's in that camp. I like to raise the model or framework rather of eating competence, which in some ways is similar to intuitive eating, but I think it's a little bit more real world logical. Like it has things like being disciplined with food, like being competent with being able to prepare and eat enough food. So there's like a degree of nutrition literacy involved there, and real world, I guess, a real world level of I guess effort that needs to be applied. And I think you can really take any aspect of the eating competence framework and create goals that move someone further towards that. And the physical health side of things that you would expect to see with as the primary focus with fat loss, that's only one part of it. Any goal that will improve someone's enjoyment of life is a great nutrition goal. And there are many, many, many ways that nutrition can do that, independent of a body composition goal.
You just talked about, sport performance or general well-being, social health. What are some of the best bang for buck foods to support performance, general well-being, if you talk about increasing someone's efficiency with their diet?
I think it would be to take a principles-based approach with meal building. So rather than stressing about, calories, macros, how many grams of protein, these sort of things, focus on ticking off protein and plants first and foremost, and having that as like the crux of the meals that you are either ordering or preparing or prepping or whatever, and understanding that, like, because this gives you so much scope. You can apply protein and plants, that mentality, to just about every scenario you can think of. Even if you're at a restaurant, there can be a degree of that. And it doesn't mean that you have to be like really super crazy about it. Like I'm, going to order the barramundi with the salad at the pub with my friends. Like, it's not saying that. It's just saying that, like, okay, I want to make sure that my meal has some protein in it and it has a plant option there. And that's sort of like a primary component of the meal. And that really forms the foundation to what I would deem a health-seeking meal. And then if there is more of a sports performance focus, if someone wants to, is athletically inclined, then that's when we would start to add in a third principle, being we want to have a decent chunk of carbs in there. So we're sort of ticking off 3 big boxes. It's an approach that can apply to so many situations. It doesn't mean that you have to prep your own meals. It doesn't mean that you have to weigh things. It doesn't mean that you have to track things. Not that there's anything wrong with those things when it's appropriate. But if you would say to me, what's like a low effort cost, big bang for your buck type thing, I would be leaning towards taking a protein and plants mentality towards the meals you eat, and in an athletic situation, adding sort of a focus on carbohydrates secondarily to that sort of foundation there, that core.
And down that similar line of thinking, if you were someone eating out, and say you're on prep or, whatever it may be, and you're in calorie restriction mode, what would be some really good examples of some food swaps you can make for someone to, I guess, come to terms with making a decision that's the lesser of the two evils? And when I say that, I mean complete restriction to the point where they're burdening the social experience versus binge eating because it's like a fuck it moment.
I would say that a swap approach, generally speaking, isn't the most productive or lowest risk approach. What I would say is take an additive approach, and naturally that will bring a swap. So if you take an additive approach where I'm going to add heaps of plants to my diet, naturally that's going to swap out other things that might not be so desirable for a health-seeking goal. Like if you're having a shitload of fruit and vegetables, that 10 a.m. croissant from the coffee shop down the road from the office is going to be less appealing because you're probably going to be fuller from the large bolus of plants that you had for breakfast. But you probably also said, well, I'm going to pack extra fruit for my morning snack. So the need for these other things, it has declined, but you've done so in a way which isn't like a restrictive, I have to delete or subtract things from my diet or certain categories of food or food groups. You've done it in like, you've added, and that's naturally created those swaps. I think because, when we impose restrictions on our diet, okay, don't get me wrong, for goals in nutrition, like there's always a degree of restriction. But my thing is, like, if we can get away with the least amount of purposeful restriction and achieve the outcome, then we've reduced the risk massively. So if you can take this approach of additive rather than subtractive and still get the same outcome, like you can still achieve your goal with that approach, then why would you add restriction in just to put yourself at more risk, or the client at greater levels of risk of developing disordered eating or, a problematic level of food focus or what have you? So yeah, it'll occur naturally if you take that approach of focus on plants, focus on protein. I don't even say lean protein these days, just protein. And those two food categories will naturally see, generally speaking, a decline in undesirable foods.
Yeah, I really like protein and plants. It's so simple, but it just works. It works for everything. You introduced me to it. I think I saw on your Instagram, and man, I use it a lot now because, as I said, it's just so simple, but it works for brekkie. It works when you eat, lunch, dinner. It works if you're getting food out. There was something else that's very simple, but you detailed very well. Oh yeah, the sanger. You talked about sandwiches a lot on your Instagram.
Oh yeah.
About because it's the humble sanger. How it is very, I guess, slept on to a degree for individuals, but very handy when it comes to most health-seeking scenarios. So, do you want to talk a little bit about, I guess, why that's useful for many people?
Well, let's think about a sandwich here. It can be made zero cook, so it's convenient. So you're just putting things together. It can be made protein and plants focused. There are also other approaches that you can apply to a sandwich to enhance the level of health seekingness. An example would be using wholemeal bread rather than white bread. Not to say that white bread's bad or doesn't have its place. This is just from a general health sort of overall population level recommendation type thing. But the main thing I love about a sandwich is that it's fair go. When I think about a sandwich, I think about a true blue, fair dinkum Aussie battler. Someone who's just, everyone's doubted him. No one pays much attention to him anymore because they're too focused on their fancy Insta salads or something. But, old mate sandwich, he's still working hard and he's still doing a better job than all the rest of them. I just like the true blue battler theme that I get with sandwiches, I just think it's just an underdog. I love an underdog battler, and that's how I view a sandwich.
Why has it been forgotten, the sandwich?
Because people are afraid of bread, or maybe not so much these days, but I think we've come out of a phase which has been anti-carb, and then there was like the anti-gluten theme. And also we have social media as well, which is all like these health foods. And then you got the hipster bloggers who are like, making these big fancy salads and Insta things, and the sandwich has just been in the background, copying all the shit, but still has the potential to absolutely destroy all the other things you'll see out there and do a better job for health, convenience, taste. Like, it just ticks all the boxes, but does it in such a humble way.
I've still got bread in my prep. Organic bread.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Mate, I just had the imagery there of you with your camo hat and jacket on there, ripping a sandwich out the side.
Exactly right.
Well, yeah, mate.
Yeah.
The next thing we want to get onto is talking a little bit about calorie consciousness with tracking.
Without tracking. With or without tracking, I suppose.
With tracking, but also without tracking. And when we say without tracking, we're referring to intuitive eating. And I had a conversation with Aiden during the week when we were prepping this episode and some of the topics he wanted to talk to you about. And one of the comments I made, and Aiden has a few comments which he'll talk about in a moment, but I said, it's a bit like, personally, I believe that by doing tracking, you learn how to eyeball foods when you're out, like serving sizes, and in that sense educates you to make more informed decisions when you're eating intuitively. But then your response to that was that.
But then I said, like, although that I agree that is helpful, I think there's a difference between intuitive eating and then just tracking calories in your head.
Because when you're eyeballing food, it's still not really intuitive because you're still basing it on the learnings you got from calorie tracking. So what are your thoughts on intuitive eating as a strategy for helping people to maintain, a positive relationship with food and like all those other factors we talked about, general well-being and physical performance?
So the research will tell us that intuitive eating is a great thing for psychological health, and even BMI. But it's like a chicken and egg thing. It's like, do people intuitive eat? Do they have a fantastic, like, are they generally a more of a healthier BMI range because of intuitive eating, or because they aren't interested in changing their body weight or shape? They don't really have a need to do anything that isn't eating based on how they feel. Now, I think it's important to be clear on the definition of intuitive eating. So if you are intentionally trying to manipulate your calorie intake through your food selection or how much you eat, and or you are doing that because you want to change your body weight or shape, by definition, you are not intuitively eating. If you are eating in a manner that considers your past experience of tracking to determine portion size, food selection, that's not intuitive eating either. Definition, like based on the definition of intuitive eating. Things of like intuitive eating, we think about non-dichotomous thinking, so not labeling foods good or bad. We also think about eating based on hunger and fullness cues, and eating so in a way that respects and appreciates one's body. So eating in the absence of calorie tracking is a very different thing to what the definition of intuitive eating entails. Now, back to the question of, is intuitive eating, generally speaking, going to be a really positive thing for people to do? Yeah, like I said, the research really strongly indicates this. But I think we also have to be realistic and understand that people want to lose weight. People want to look a certain way. And when people want to look a certain way, it's not always motivated by sort of extrinsic or damaging motives. Some people would argue it is. I can't agree with that at this point, at least. And in those scenarios, we're naturally going to step away from intuitive eating. We're going to have to, if we want to achieve that, say, for example, fat loss or muscle growth goal. Because if we think that we're going to achieve that, I'm trying to change my body weight or shape in a specific manner with intuitive eating, then like we're not actually doing intuitive eating anymore. We're definitionally, that's not intuitive eating. So my attitude is like, if someone isn't trying to change, like their goal in nutrition doesn't involve changing body weight, shape, or form, then intuitive eating should be one of the key default approaches that you take, because it's the most positive in terms of risk level and all the various outcomes that we see from intuitive eating being so consistently positive, at least indicated in the research. But we can't use it all the time. We wish we could, because I think it would be a really positive thing for a lot of people, but it conflicts with goals that people want to achieve in their nutrition, and goals that are perfectly valid and should not be put down because of like this, oh, it's all vanity, or it's all like, it's just, some people would argue, oh, it's all negative body image. And like, obviously, I can't agree with that. There are people out there who, for so many valid and important positive reasons, are interested in, say, for example, weight loss.
So if someone is after a body composition goal like fat loss, but they're not tracking, are there any other frameworks, like such as your protein and plants framework, or any other strategies that you pretty commonly can use to make a diet more calorie conscious without tracking?
Yep. So yeah, protein and plants, but then also accept and respect when it comes to higher calorie eating events, whether they're planned or unplanned. Being non-dichotomous, because being dichotomous can sometimes result in excessive eating, and that's not good for calorie consciousness. I think routine is a huge one, massive one, and we don't need to be, again, dichotomous in our approach to our eating routine and schedule, but I think having some kind of eating routine is a massively helpful thing. It can help regulate hunger and fullness levels. It can help people be more aware of the different hunger and fullness levels, or more in tune with that. It can make manipulating the diet way easier. It can make life more convenient. When you have a routine, you are generally more efficient in how you go about doing things, and a food is in it of itself a thing that we do, but also a part of our day. And if we can be really efficient with that, spend less time, spend less mental resources on it, then there's going to be more room for other positive things to come in, so life can flourish more. What else do I like? Yeah, accept and respect, protein and plants, routine, not being all or nothing, taking a total health perspective to food, remembering that, you're trying to change your nutrition because you want your life to be better, and always keeping that in mind, being able to call yourself out when your pursuit of, say, a weight loss goal is having a negative effect on your overall happiness. And don't get me wrong, sometimes we've got to make sacrifices so we can have like you take a short-term sacrifice for a long-term gain. Like that's perfectly valid. Like if someone wanted to buy a house in Australia, they're going to have to work really, really hard and be very careful with how they spend their money so they can buy that property. And that's okay as well. And I think the same thing can apply to a fat loss goal or something like that. But it's more about not losing sight of why you're doing this, and not getting so wrapped up in that goal that it really does have this negative impact on your life. And that was something that I went through. And I think a lot of people who get into fitness go through that. You see the cycle. People get into fitness. You see it on Instagram. People get into fitness and training. They get more serious. They get more serious. Maybe they become a personal trainer, or maybe they don't. Maybe they go and do a competition, or they just get so serious. And then, after a few years, their message changes, and then they sort of, they fade out, or they do something else, or it's no longer being that pro WBFF, or whatever an acronym it's called these days. It's not as appealing. I think you see this cycle where people wake up to this thing like, why am I doing this? Like, what do I really want? They suddenly become more, not suddenly, but over time become more, aware of the things that they want. And then nutrition and training is more of something that fits into that, rather than something that becomes this all-consuming thing.
Yeah, we spoke to Luke Tulloch about the importance of understanding a client's values and trying to live and structure the program in a way that reflects that. And I suppose it's kind of linked into what you're talking about in terms of overall well-being and what's important to the person.
Yeah. Yeah. Luke's definitely gone through, a lot of life change. When I first met Luke, he was just like, he's still probably pretty jacked, but he was like proper, full bodybuilder spec. And, now he's gone back. You can see it in his content. Like he's very focused on the things that make him happy. He's got these various hobbies and these interests, and everything he does and how he trains is so focused on his values. And now he's got a daughter. He doesn't live in Australia. Like he lives in a different place where, I assume at least, fitness isn't so much of a big deal. And he's been able to really structure his approach to nutrition and training in a way that enhances his life in the life stage that he's in now. And I think that, I assume again that he takes that approach with his clients and really gets to know them, takes the time to get to know them, so he can tailor an approach to training that is going to be feasible for them, but also something that's going to enhance their life. Oh, and that's actually another, I guess, approach that I remember we were talking about, the non-tracking approaches like the protein and plants, or even just not also tracking. Like these things all apply as well. Keeping expectations feasible in that flow state. Like, because if you set the bar too high, you're setting yourself up for failure. When you feel like a failure, then your motivation, self-efficacy and motivation, that time there, that suffers. So your motivation to keep going also takes a bit of a hit. So you want to set expectations that, of course, provide some level of challenge, because otherwise it's like, well, this is easy. But I think it's important to set feasible expectations and understand that, okay, maybe your coach who's like a really hectic bodybuilder can do this, but don't let their expectations of training and nutrition be superimposed upon you. And that coach should be sort of trying to find what is within that nice, feasible zone for you in the context of your life, your values, your barriers, your whatever.
So I guess what we want to talk a bit about now, Mackenzie, is your research. So we understand you looked at the low energy availability in surfers, and there was an underconsumption of carbohydrates there, and that's an ongoing issue you're seeing in surfers. Can you tell us maybe where these issues stem from and some of the main findings from that paper?
The main finding from that paper is that surfers are at risk of low energy availability as a whole.
Right.
Now, athletic, like competition level, no influence. Things like age, no influence. Experience, and so like all those things, no influence. But some huge, like as someone who conducted the study, and I think you guys have research experience, is that correct?
Hayden,
Yeah, so I published some research, the protocol paper for resistance training for teens research. We're looking at the implementation or scale up of resistance training in schools. So that's part of my PhD.
That's cool.
But yeah, this podcast is about you, mate. So we'll focus on your research here. But
mate, I can talk way too much. Well, you've already got me stuck.
The thing I'm most interested about, Mackenzie, is like with surfers, and I have mates who go surfing.
Yeah.
And everyone's got their own interests, right? But they'll go out for 4 hours or more at periods out there surfing. And for me, it's no surprise that they would, be under consuming in a number of those different macronutrients. So the other thing is, though, with surfers too, unlike, say, those that are involved in physique sports, I imagine the kind of character you would get in the surfing space, much more laid back. They don't care as much about, I guess, like we do, physical conditioning and the role of nutrient restriction for improved body composition. So, like, when you did this study, did you find there was any limitations in terms of like the surfers themselves and their reporting of?
Yeah. So energy availability, like that whole topic cooked at this stage. Got a lot of legs on it, but the way we measure it, the way it's quantified, or that's so much needs to be done there before we could conduct a study and sort of be confident in the results. Let me tell you, I'm not putting much weight in the findings of my study. I'm taking the findings of the study, thinking about my own experience, thinking about my observations, and thinking like, there's probably a good chunk of surfers who are underfueled. But there are factors like, how often do they surf? Do they do other training outside of surfing? I think the waves they surf, like there are some days where you go out and you're just having a chat with some old blokes and it's really cold because you're not moving much and you might only go out for half an hour and it's just like something to do. But there are other days where, it's big, there's 200 blokes in the water, so you're competing for waves like seagulls fighting for a hot chip. There's currents everywhere. It's a real fight and you're so focused on the fight that you don't realize how hard you're working, and you get out and you're exhausted and you're falling asleep in the afternoon and you're a mess, but you never realize at the time how hard you were working and therefore how many calories you were expending. There are so many factors. I think that if you're sort of like a high level surfer, a surfer who goes out in the water and really goes for it and takes it seriously, you're more at risk. of this low energy availability or being underfueled, not eating enough for your needs. But, this idea of why surfers aren't so focused on their nutrition, it's not because they're laid back. These days surfers are not laid back. Like, let me tell you, you can go and surf some places and it is anything but laid back. It is like there's fights. Let's put it that way, like physical fights. It's just because surfers don't care. Like, surfers don't care about training nutrition. They care about surfing, And the thing is, like, probably 5-10 years ago, gym-based surf training, probably not really a thing. And now it's big. And there are surf coaches everywhere, and every single stick-it-up Grom who lives on the Gold Coast is with their surf coach who's got the camera on the beach filming their surf, and it's all serious business, and there's, it's all this big bloody wanking thing going on. But like,
Mick Fanning popularized a lot of
oh,
that.
100%. He was probably one of the first.
I've seen videos of him. I don't know whether it be like with the Panthers training and that, but doing like cable trunk rotations.
So he tore his hamstring off the bone, like in like 2006 or something like that. He tore his hamstring clean off the bone, and he came back and was just like a changed man. He was really one of the first pro surfers, to my understanding, to, not be under the influence of something all the time and actually train and worry about nutrition. But, like, don't get me wrong, training in the gym nowadays as a surfer or a competitive surfer is very commonplace. In fact, it's pretty much every competitive surfer who takes it seriously, especially at like more of the higher level, pro level, they're training in the gym for surfing. But what they're doing, I think, is, well, from what I see, is pretty stupid. And nutrition is just like a whole nother kettle of fish. It's sort of like when you have you go to a family event and your auntie's like, oh, because they know you're in the fitness industry or a trainer or whatever. They're like, oh, I'm really getting into my health. Yeah, I've decided this year is going to be the one. And they're like, oh yeah, what have you done about that? They're like, the first thing they do, oh yeah, I've started going to F45, or I've joined a gym, or it's always about training. Like, you never hear them, generally speaking, bring up nutrition first. If they bring up nutrition, it's like an afterthought. Oh yeah, I'm watching what I'm eating, or I'm doing the 5-2, or I'm doing this keto thing. What do you think about keto? Well, it's just not as emphasized in surfing nutrition. And don't get me wrong, this is the reason why I'm interested in being in the surfing space as a nutrition professional, because it's like, you look at gym-based training. Sorry if there's background noise, by the way.
It's all good.
There's gym-based training, like, wasn't even a thing for surfers probably 10 years ago. And Mick Fanning was really like, I remember when I was a kid, when he started doing it, everyone was like, whoa, this guy's weird almost. He was the one who really popularized it. And then all the pro surfers were like, well, if he's doing it, then I better be doing it as well. And now, so I'm thinking, will nutrition go that way as well?
Yeah. I was going to ask you whether you thought it was more of a case of surfers just don't seem to care, or there's like an anti kind of carbohydrate attitude in some areas of surfing.
Yeah.
Because I remember you sharing some stuff, I think maybe when you were doing this paper, just certain surfing individuals who were spreading some information around, I can't remember exactly, but it's kind of anti-carbohydrate.
Yeah. So majority is don't care, straight up in surfing. The majority is don't care, just eat how I feel. And that's awesome, actually. I think in a lot of ways, that's an approach that a lot of people in the fitness industry would get a lot of benefit from in terms of their overall life well-being. That's the majority of surfers. Like, I just eat based whatever I want. And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, I'm health conscious, and it involves just like maybe not getting Macca's or KFC for lunch and getting like a chicken, an avocado roll, or an acai bowl, something like that. But there is definitely like a kind of biohacking cohort in the surfing community. And there are even a few world tour professional surfers who, they follow like Paul Saladino and like preach his stuff. He's the carnivore.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
imagine if you go towards Byron, you probably get more of that crowd.
Oh, 100%. But it's interesting because some of them are like hectic competitive surfers. It's not like the longboard, cruisy, Byron hippie surfers. It's like before school, I've got my surf coach and then I'm doing my surf training and like they're all aggressive and they're like, oh yeah, like they kind of try to take nutrition into their own hands. And I still think in surfing, there is this underlying anti-establishment like culture about it. So whenever someone mentions something like Australian Institute of Sport or scientific research or, the Australian dietary guidelines, they're like, oh, the guides are going to make us fat sick. Like, and then they see some bloke on Instagram who's, talking about there being no poison in his meal, his grass-fed steak or something. And like, they're all into that. There's a bit of that going on, but it's almost like that. Yeah, it's almost like a kind of a corporate biohacking like theme. It's got that sort of theme about it. It's like, it's a bit like I drive a Tesla. I'm an accountant. Don't tell me you drive a Tesla.
He drives. But
you know what I'm saying? Like it's almost like it's almost like a wanky corporate thing in surfing where they're trying to like, oh, what's that movie or that Instagram thing? Not Instagram, Netflix thing. It was like this TV series based in California. It was I think it was that you remember You on Netflix, like YOU,
Yeah.
the crazy guy.
Yeah.
And then there was that what he had the wife and they had a best friend and the family was like really hectic on their health foods. And they did all these things like, oh, the kid can't have sugar and it was all this like wanky
organic
corporate organic raw milk. Like
Yeah.
there's that in surfing.
Yeah.
There's that sort of thing. And that's what I was trying to get at. Like I think that's the best way of describing it. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. But it's not this like it's like this rich hippie corporate like biohacking thing.
I think one of the challenges with a lot of nutrition research, and you can comment on this, seems to be with like self-report. Very difficult to, like when people aren't aware exactly how much they're consuming or, the energy density of certain foods they're eating. So, the research into long-term dieting, I guess, particularly with multi-year randomized control trials, is difficult. For instance, if you had a study where you were looking, and particularly in like, say, bodybuilders, and you were trying to randomize two groups of athletes to, say, a low protein group and a high protein. If you're imagine randomizing bodybuilders to a low protein group, that all drop out kind of thing. And it's like, I guess there's a lot more cohort studies. There seem to be a lot more cohort studies. One of those pieces of research, which I was talking to Aiden about before we came on, which was looking at particular topic we were talking about before, which was intuitive eating. And there doesn't seem to be much literature on this. And I think for good reason, because it's kind of hard to define. A lot of it's self-report, the use of surveys to kind of quantify a lot of the outcomes. But this study, longitudinal associations between intuitive eating and weight-related behaviors in a population-based sample of young adults, Christoph 2021. So they had 1,664 participants, which is no surprise. I think it'd be really easy to get participants on an intuitive eating study because likely paying them just to eat intuitively or eat the way they've already been eating. But they had a survey, and the survey was based, like, there was measures of how strongly they agreed or disagreed on a couple of different items. One of those was I can stop when I'm full and I can trust my body to, those satiety signals and signals of hunger to regulate their appetite. Is this a challenge that you see, in your own practice, but also with the research you've done? like self-report. Obviously, we just talked about it there in surfers, but more broadly, I guess, amongst population, not just surfing athletes, but athletes on the
Absolutely.
whole.
Yeah, and people have this perception like, oh, if someone's an athlete, they're gonna like do whatever you say. They're gonna be like, put me in, coach. It's like, haha, like it's definitely not like that, even high level. And some of the stories, guys, like um Reed Real, Dr. Reed Real has about some of the athletes he's worked in the UFC over in China. And you just go, yeah, that idea that athletes do whatever you tell them to do because they're like dedicated athletes and it's their job. It's like, bro, you're so off the mark. But yeah, adherence is massive, both in nutrition coaching and like all getting being able to talk to a client, understand them, to try and foster adherence, is so much more valuable than knowing like the Krebs cycle in nutrition, in actual nutrition practice, because at the end of the day, everything is rate limited by adherence. In research, obviously, it's a huge limitation. And my study, straight up, like that was one of the biggest, and any study looking at energy availability, because when we think about the values we need to calculate energy availability, so just for the audience so they're aware, we didn't calculate energy availability. We used a screening tool, which was only validated in females, and I only had a handful of female subjects. So, but if you're going to measure, like actually calculate someone's energy availability, the data you need to do that calculation is really difficult to obtain in a way that is accurate. So any sort of food, like a way of trying to determine how many calories someone is eating in research, like that's a very difficult thing to do accurately. And even if you're using best practice methods, there's probably going to be an inherent adjustment in how someone eats because of just the act of reporting food. And that in and of itself is a huge limitation to the accuracy of research. Like chances are there were probably, people doing the food recalls for the study that I conducted. They're forgetting stuff, or oh, that doesn't look very, very good, so I'll just, I won't mention that, or I only had 6 chicken wings, actually had 12. Like there's just natural that's going to be the case. Like even I'm sure you guys, you've spent time tracking. Sometimes if you have a bit of an excessive eating thing and you decide to track it, which is a whole nother topic and something I won't get into, but it's never as bad as what it actually was on paper, because you never are fully like honest about it.
Yeah.
In the MyFitnessPal,
Yeah.
Or at least you can't be, because you're like, well, I don't know how much mayo was in the thing I ate. I bought it from the shop.
Definitely.
I think there's a
100%.
food awareness piece is really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I'm not denying that. I'm not trying to argue or in any capacity that tracking isn't a fantastic education tool.
Yeah.
And food awareness and in research, if someone spent time tracking, it's probably going to make it much like their ability to fill in a food recall or food diary or whatever, probably going to be a lot more valid.
That's probably another co-founding variable in a lot of these studies too. Like who has actually learnt how to track their food?
Yeah.
When you're doing a diet recall, how much does that influence their ability to recall effectively?
That's another one as well. But tracking is a education tool until it isn't. Once people have learned what you can learn from tracking, that's when it starts to flip over and potentially have a deleterious effect. For example, ability to eat based on internal hunger and fullness cues with longer extended periods of time tracking, the confidence and ability to do that may suffer. It's like any skill. If you don't practice it, you will lose it. If you don't surf for a year, well, I did that because I was injured and it was, I don't know. I'm just thinking about some skill that you don't do. Like if I didn't operate an excavator for a year, the first couple of weeks getting back into it, I'd probably suck and be really slow. It's like any skill. If you don't practice it, like you lose it to a degree. And if you've had it before, yeah, it's going to be easier to pick back up. But I think that's applicable with tracking. So it's a sort of, again, it's a tool that you would use for a period of time to achieve or do something. And then when people continue it for longer periods of time, we start to create risk. We're not getting more educational benefit from it. We've just created risk. And it's probably a good, sorry?
Like reliance.
Yeah, a reliance or a dependence, or even just it changes the way you think of food. So yeah, like I said, it's a tool to use and nothing more than that.
You want to just pull back because you mentioned a little bit of, I guess, misinformation earlier when it came to like the Paul Saladino surfers and that kind of thing. You also mentioned the dietary guidelines. Because I know you've, I've been a bystander watching you cop some shit online when it comes to the dietary guidelines and people misunderstanding, I guess, what the updated guidelines even are. In regards to, I think, the food pyramid and that kind of thing, how that's not super relevant anymore. So could you, I guess, clear the air around that? Do you understand what I'm referring to when I'm talking about?
Yeah. So, government food guidelines. You go up to anyone in the street and you mention that phrase to them, they're probably going to say, oh, like food pyramid, right? And, when we think about the food pyramid, it's like cereals and breads and these sort of things are like the focus. And then it sort of trickles up to like plants aren't even prioritized that much. It's really a focus on breads and cereals. And I'm not sitting here saying that those foods are bad, but to have them as the primary focus of a population level recommendation is, like that's probably outdated. But this is what most people think as government guidelines still are. Whereas in reality, they've been updated since then. It's not even a pyramid anymore. And the thing that gets me so much is when people are like, the guidelines make us fat and sick, they're outdated, they're old, and they refer to the guidelines as the food pyramid. It's like, brother, if you actually knew what the guidelines were, you wouldn't be calling it a pyramid.
I think that just sums up
social
media.
You would know that it's a pie chart.
Less than 5% meet those guidelines, right? And
well, that's the other thing.
And so
like they make us fat and sick, but like no one eats the guidelines. So how can we blame them?
You know, unless you try it.
Well, how can we blame them for poor population health when no one actually adheres to them? Like it's a population level recommendation. It's like a guideline, loose guideline. These are sort of some things to think about. Like it's really nothing more than that. And they disregard the guides for whatever reason, but fail to understand that like the people who make the guidelines, who synthesize them, like that's teams of people, and it's no joke. Like they're proper nutrition experts, people who know so much more about nutrition and health and research than me, and certainly Instagram Bondi Beach blogger Biohacker 3000 or whoever. All right. So, the guidelines are really valid, and they are a summation of the current available nutrition research, synthesized in a manner that considers limitations and practical considerations, and then transformed into a set of guidelines or just loose population level recommendations. Like that's all they are. So, if I ate the diet that was recommended specifically in the dietary guidelines, I probably would be underfilled. I wouldn't be meeting my energy demands, so the health consequences would be negative, not positive. But general themes like, hey, focus on plants. When you're eating grains, focus on whole grains, limit foods with added sugar, salts, things like, yeah, like indulgences. We all know that we probably shouldn't be eating too much of those things, and they should be a small component of an overall balanced diet. Like, that's a principle. Or because the dietary guidelines say to eat, X servings of grains per day doesn't mean that that's going to be appropriate for everyone. And that's fine. That's not the intention of them.
It's kind of like BMI, a bit related, but people love to shit in the fitness industry because it's, I'm jacked.
It doesn't take, I'm jacked.
And it's like, it's a population tool used to be able to assess like thousands to millions of people at a time to draw conclusions. It's not something used for one person.
Yeah. Like BMI is fantastic when it is used for, when it's used appropriately.
Yeah. I guess one of the other things we want to talk a bit about is the popularity of the carnivore diet in this day and age. The World Health Organization actually categorizes red meat as probably carcinogenic. What are your perspectives on the carnivore diet and I guess the health ramifications, but also how this can apply to a performance standpoint as well and the athlete?
To be honest, I don't know how you deal with all the stuff online as a nutritionist. Like, I mean, it's bad enough as a trainer with all the like couch share experts, but nutrition is the next level.
I don't anymore. That's the thing. Like I don't pay attention to what other people post that much anymore. Like I don't get G'd up about it. I don't create content to rebut it. I just don't. I just go, oh, I want to write something about nutrition and just do that. Whereas previously I get all G'd up and I want to call them out. Like,
the thing is, like, people love to focus on what confirms their bias, like I was saying before. So, they'll search for the literature which confirms their beliefs. But there's like, for instance, like meat-based, as opposed to there's a ton of research out there which shows the benefits of dietary fiber, but they'll ignore that and they'll find like the one piece of literature out there that will support their position or their stance.
I think it's about like, what's the consensus say?
Yeah.
The consensus definitely indicates that we probably should be eating fibrous plants. And yeah, like you can find a study that would maybe say no. You could find studies that say meat only is cool. What's the consensus say? Because there's been so much research on the diet and health outcomes that at this point we can have a pretty confident understanding of like what we should be focusing on when it comes to food if we want to promote health and longevity. And like I said, the consensus is pretty clear. Like the consensus definitely points toward plant fiber, and just eating meat, probably not a fantastic idea. That's for health. What about performance? Well, then we go back to physiology, bioenergetics, the use of glucose in strenuous movement. Okay, we probably should be eating some carbohydrates. If we are in a state of where there's an absence of carbohydrates, I think in a lot of cases, people are still going to perform fine, and they often do. But if we want to maximize performance based on research and just an understanding of physiology, deleting carbohydrates probably isn't supportive of that. See, this is the thing, like there was that paper by Louise Burke, I think they did in Race Walkers, can't remember the name of it, but they found out all this stuff of like, oh yeah, you can be fat adapted, and but I'm like, but why? Like what's the downside to eating carbs? So even if it doesn't do anything positive, like what's the downside? Like you could argue that, oh, it's tasty. That's enough upside because there's no downsides. So, like, that's just the way I think of it. I'm like, what's the point?
As you know, if you've got a balanced perspective, the individuals from both extremes will hate, they all hate balance. There seems to be an issue with maintaining balance. So
yeah, balances are cool.
it's not cool to be
It's
balanced.
not fun, but yeah, like I said, consensus, logic, even consensus of research, logic, being exclusive one food category, like exclusively eating one food category. I just don't think you need to be a rocket scientist to know that probably not a smart idea.
Yeah, and like even this research, a lot of that research, a lot of it's cherry picked and cited online. But when you're looking at certain types of studies, like observational studies, a lot of people don't even realize that they're not accounting for all the confounding variables that come along with, like, say, meat consumption. If you just get a group who answer in a survey that they eat more meat, they're also all the time going to consume more fast food, smoke more, all these other confounding variables. So as you say, it just comes down to the consensus.
And that's the other thing too. It's like generally if someone's going to adopt a diet, whether it be plant-based, meat-based, or the general, healthy eating guidelines, generally they're positioning themselves in a point where they're actually trying to make positive change around their nutritional habits. And I think with that inevitably comes weight loss or improvements in body composition and habits around food anyway. And
I think that'd be good for a lot of people, especially because we've got probably a predominantly bodybuilding audience, to hear a different perspective on nutritional approaches. So I know it was for me originally as well.
I'd like to think that some bodybuilders would start to think more about the people they're working with rather than them.
Honest, I think a lot of those principles, like, you could apply in the similar sense to the way a lot of like enhanced bodybuilders look at the use of PEDs and drugs. It's almost like cruise and blast. And like when you're in competition, yeah, if you're going to restrict yourself for a period of time to get the best outcome, and that's what you do, well, I guess that's what you have to do, right? But in the off season, don't continue to restrict yourself to the point where it's causing even more like psychological damage, damaging social. Like learn to let go a bit, enjoy your life, go out, eat more, have the time with your friends, because when you're in that 20-week prep, you're gonna
let life flourish, because you've been hammering those other aspects of your health, or probably all aspects of your health, arguably, for a period of time. Like the off season is your opportunity to bring things back into a nice, like, recover, like the recovery diet, I think, is more than just recovering to a healthy body weight or a healthy amount of calories or whatever. I think it's like recovering life.
But no, it was really good to meet you, mate. I thought it was a nice lighthearted discussion, like talking about different things like surfing and Mick Fanning and that kind of thing. It should resonate well with the listeners.
Yeah, thanks for your time, guys. You've got a pretty good tight ship you run. Looks pretty organized. Fortunately, I wasn't able to. It's just crazy with like what I do now. It's like, WhatsApp messages go unreplied for like a week.
Yeah.
Whereas previously, like I'd be replying to like a WhatsApp message in like an hour.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. Like I get messages come up at work, like when I'm on site, and I just go, oh yeah, I'll reply to that later. And it's just, then a week later I see I've got like a number next to the WhatsApp icon or something.
It seems like you're living a pretty almost like dichotomous life, because I feel like when people get into the online coaching space, they go down like really down that path and like going to Bali and living that life. But now you kind of like got that aspect, but then you're doing like land moving. It's pretty sick.
Yeah, well, I did that. I lived in Indonesia. I traveled around Europe and North Africa while working from the laptop, and I did all the things. Like, it's so funny because I met this guy at the gym where I do my rehab in the mornings. I'm still doing for my knee. And he got talking to me because of my truck. He parks next to me in the morning, and he's actually working on a site up the road from where we're working. And he's this big Jack Brazilian guy, just like won this NABBA bodybuilding show or something. And he's like, I'm doing my PT certification at night, like after work. I'm like, far out, long days, man. And he's like, yeah, the dream is to like work online so I can like, travel and work and live in Bali and stuff. I'm like, well, man, it's not cut up to what you think it is. Like, it's cool for a bit, and then you're just like, what am I doing with my life? Like, what's the long-term outcome of this? Like, where will this take me? Like all these sort of questions you start asking yourself, and then it
Like
just goes.
juxtaposition, because you and Luke seem like you're a lot happier than a lot of the other PTs online who have, done the opposite and gone to Bali. Say, like, you look like are pulling away and actually deciding on what's important to you. It's like you seem happier. You know what I mean? It's like, but then there's all these guys doing that to some extent.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just get sucked into that, like, I want to be that coach.
Well, they
And it's like,
yeah,
they get caught in it. And it's like, it's cool. Like I said, it's cool. Like when I moved to Indonesia, I was like, wow, I've made it, brother. I was like, I'm a big gun. And the lifestyle was sick and all that sort of stuff. But it just, honestly, it just gets old.
Yeah.
Like it loses its spark. It gets old. It gets boring. And then, every day just molds into the next one. And you just go like, what now? Like it's monotonous. It becomes monotonous, or at least it did for me. And I think this isn't just in fitness, but just everywhere. People do a certain thing for so many years and put so much time into building a career or a business in something that they're almost stuck. Like I've spoken to like 25-year-old personal trainers who want to leave the fitness industry, but are like, oh, I can't do that. It's like, brother, you're 25. I think so many people like are afraid of change. And I'm afraid of change. I was afraid of change. And to say that my life's better now, I wouldn't agree with that. To say it's worse, also wouldn't agree with that. It's just different.
Right.
Like I'm just doing different stuff. Like I guess the positives are that I feel like what I'm doing now has like a long-term progression.
Yeah.
And financially, like it's going to allow me to do things that are more long-term focused. I had business ideas that required capital when I was like doing the nutrition thing and living in Indonesia. I wanted to do business stuff in Indonesia, and I worked out how much money I would need to have for that and how much I would need to earn a week from coaching to get that in X amount of years. And it just wasn't feasible. So basically, if I just kept doing what I was doing, I would have been earning enough to like live a comfortable life, pay the bills, go on surf trips. But that's it. Like it wouldn't have facilitated those long-term, like higher level goals that require funds. And I don't like the idea of doing a job for money, but like it's undeniable that in this day and age, like we have goals that are money dependent and we have things that we want to pay for. And like I generally love earth moving, like business. It's my dad started the business 40 years ago. When I was a little kid, I could operate an excavator. Like I've always loved mechanical things and diesel and that. So it's not like just a money thing. But yeah, I just think so many people get stuck in something and they're afraid of letting go. I think letting go is a very challenging thing, but also a very rewarding thing.
Yeah.
I think so. I think Aiden's cooked. He's had a really fucking tough day.
Yeah. Sorry, I just went off on a massive rant.
No, that's all good. I mean, we weren't gonna put any of that in after we wrapped up, but I don't know if you're happy for it to go in. Some of it could be good to go in.
Oh, it's still recording. Oh yeah, sweet. Put it in, brother.
It's never stopped recording.
I don't care. Like, put in all of it.
We also never.
In fact, I think
all the best for both sides of your professional life. You look pretty wrecked.
Yeah, appreciate that.
So hope you're managing.
Well, that's the thing. Like, it's really long days.
Yeah.
It's like a 4:20. Well, 4:20 wake up,
Yeah.
and
Crazy.
yeah, it's long days. Like I sort of get home at like 5.
Yeah.
And if I get home earlier, I'll go for a surf. So I don't really get to the desk until 5:30, which is when we're going to start the call. And then if I've got nutrition work, it's like, yeah, it's long days. So it is tiring, but I'm really enjoying working hard. I'll be honest with you. I'm enjoying like that sort of challenge. So yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, all the best.
Yeah. Thanks,
Take care.
guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your time. And yeah, all the best.
I'll tag you in the Tesla once I put the body kit on it. You'll I'll tag you in it. I'll tag you in it. Say, ask for your thoughts. You can
A
roast
body kit on a Tesla could be cool, actually. When it like, because it's different.
Oh, just anyway. That was funny. And when you said that, because Aiden was.
Oh, it's not Tesla.
No, I get it.
The common Tesla driver.
Right. No need to backtrack, mate. He's the same as all of them.
Is he? Oh,
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, guys. We'll catch you later.
Sorry, mate.
Take care.
All good.